Okay, let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
We are moving deep into the realm of political science methodology today, and we're specifically carving out space for an approach that, well, it often gets overshadowed by the spreadsheets and the regression analysis.
The big data.
Exactly. Our mission here is to define, justify, and really structure what we mean by qualitative political science.
Right.
It's a deep dive into how we move beyond those hard numbers to genuinely understand the subjective reality of political action.
And this is such a crucial discussion. I mean, not just for academics, but really for anyone who wants to understand why people vote the way they do, or, why political movements suddenly ignite.
Right.
We are pulling insights from a really detailed academic text, a Prolegomena, which is, an introduction to the fundamental principle.
A starting point.
A starting point, exactly.
Yeah.
It conceptualizes this qualitative approach from the ground up, and it gives us both the philosophical grounding and, importantly, the practical rules for researchers.
This sounds essential because if you've ever looked at a poll and just thought, but why did they feel that way? Well, that's the gap we're trying to fill.
That is the gap.
So the central argument we're exploring is pretty simple. As the subject of politics widens and becomes just vastly more complex, the methods we use simply have to evolve to meet that complexity.
They must. And if you look back, say, a generation, as scholars like Marsh and Stoker have pointed out, political science sometimes felt like it was created by a small club of like-minded people.
A closed shop.
A very closed shop, yeah. Often focused very narrowly on measurable institutional outcomes. What we're seeing now is this necessary, essential embrace of methodological pluralism.
We need more tools in the toolbox.
We need that diversity,
Yeah.
because the political world as we actually experience it is anything but uniform.
And that's the real nugget of insight here, isn't it? This whole deep dive is about establishing that qualitative research isn't just like a useful addition. It's a required epistemological lens. It gives us the tools to analyze the messy, subjective reality that numbers alone just can't capture. This isn't just about adding a few interviews to a study.
Not at all. It's about a fundamental shift in how we even seek knowledge in the first place. It's about moving past the rigid boundaries of the past, focusing on identifying the essence, the profound purpose, and maybe most importantly, establishing the necessary rules.
The guardrail.
The rigorous standards that have to accompany this qualitative approach. Because, as we're going to explore, flexibility in methodology is absolutely necessary, but, and this is key, it must never be synonymous with procedural arbitrariness.
Right, it's not just anything goes.
Precisely.
So let's start with that fundamental question, the why. Why is this methodological shift so necessary right now?
Well, to justify this qualitative turn, we first have to recognize that the subject of political science itself it's constantly changing. It's incredibly dynamic.
Not a static object of study.
Not anymore. It's no longer just about studying state structures or voting laws. The world of politics has widened to include everything from, social media movements to cultural identity debates.
And that immediately changes the entire scope. The source material quotes Tadeusz Klementowicz, who defines politics not just through institutions but as action,
Yes.
the meaningful presence of diverse actors in the political sphere. But what does that comprehensive definition really encompass?
It encompasses a huge spectrum. Klementowicz argues that research has to cover the explicit actions of subjects exerting power or those influencing its use.
Okay, that's the traditional view. Power and influence.
That's the traditional view, yes. But equally, and this is the crucial part, modern political science has to collect knowledge about political culture, ideologies, public opinion, stereotypes, and even the myths that are prevalent in a society.
So if you only look at the gears of power,
you miss the ghost in the machine. You miss the entire underlying intellectual and cultural framework that informs and honestly often dictates how those mechanisms even work.
So, okay, if we're studying myths and stereotypes, then yeah, traditional methods start looking a bit
thin, exactly.
We have this robust history of using systemic, institutional, comparative, behavioral, decisional methodologies. And they're incredibly valuable when you're studying, say, the structural coherence of a party system.
Oh, they are essential for those areas, absolutely.
Yeah.
But the complexity of modern political life demands tools that can handle dynamic, nonlinear relationships.
For example?
Well, for example, traditional approaches teach us how institutions are structured. Their org charts, their rules. But the relations between those institutions, the informal networks, the personal trust, the political calculations happening behind closed doors.
A human element.
The human element, it's messy, it's dynamic, and it requires methods that can trace complex human interaction rather than just organizational charts.
And you just have to think about the rise of media and cultural politics. Studying party systems is one thing. Studying the cultural and media environment around them, like how a news channel's framing completely changes voter perception, or how a meme campaign shifts public trust.
You're way beyond simple system theory or behavioral polling at that point.
Far beyond.
Absolutely. The established frameworks are excellent for stability and structure, but they often struggle with variance, with nuance, and with meaning. And that right there brings us to a phrase the source really highlights. Context makes the difference.
Okay.
This is a huge justification for the qualitative approach. You simply cannot generalize political behavior without deeply, deeply acknowledging the variable contexts it happens in.
But define context here for us. Is this just about, geography or the economic setting?
It's so much deeper than that. The context in which political objects function is complex and it's always fluctuating, precisely because it's influenced by deeply personal factors. We are talking about an individual's personal history, their deeply ingrained system of dispositions.
What's known as habitus.
Yes, the habitus, a concept popularized by Bourdieu, and also their specific assessment of the historical moment.
Okay, let's pause on habitus for a second because that's a critical piece of jargon that we need to unpack. What does it actually mean for a researcher in political science?
Habitus refers to the system of durable, transferable dispositions that structure an individual's perceptions, their actions, their thoughts.
So like the unwritten rules you live by.
Think of it as the unwritten script society gives you. It's how your background, your family's economic status, your education, your local culture, how all of that combines to create automatic assumptions about how the world works.
So for a researcher?
For a researcher, understanding a political actor's habitus means understanding that their actions are not purely rational choices. They are deeply ingrained, often unconscious reactions that are shaped by their entire personal and historical environment.
So if you study two people from a completely different habitus, let's say a farmer in a rural community and a software engineer in a major city, their political reactions to the exact same piece of legislation will be drastically different. Not because of the law itself, but because of their internalized rules for how the world works.
Exactly. And this inherent variability is crucial. It means that studying two seemingly identical political actions, for instance, two different groups protesting the same policy in two different contexts, will yield vastly different interpretations and conclusions about their motivations, their goals, and their long-term implications.
And the qualitative researcher's job is to capture that variance.
To capture it, not smooth it out for a statistical model.
This leads to a pretty logical conclusion then. If the subject matter is this diverse, and it crosses cultural, psychological, and sociological lines, then the researchers simply cannot be confined by disciplinary boundaries.
No, the source explicitly encourages the researcher to be in transit. We shouldn't feel bound by this idea of disciplinary ownership. The political scientist is encouraged, for example, to implement methods from fields like communication anthropology, ethnography, or discourse analysis. Why? Because the knowledge from those fields can unlock the meaning of political behavior in ways that pure political theory just can't.
And the source has a great line for this.
It does.
In science, there is no right of ownership.
It's an intellectual imperative. If a methodology from anthropology-like participant observation allows you to better understand the internal dynamics of a political movement than a standard survey does, then you have to use it.
You use the best tool for the job.
You use the best tool for the job. Being in between disciplines is often where the most intellectually creative and insightful results come from. And this acknowledgement that a single rigid methodology is insufficient is the very foundation of the rationale for qualitative research.
Okay, that sets the stage perfectly. Now we need to formalize this intellectual split. Social science and political science within it is generally governed by two fundamentally different epistemological camps. Let's try to clarify them, starting with the dominant trend.
Yes, the dominant trend. The vast majority of resources, funding, and the big institutional papers in recent decades have definitely gravitated toward the quantitative side.
And that's often driven by a quest for scientific legitimacy, right? Modeled on the hard sciences.
Absolutely. We have to acknowledge the intended development of quantitative methods. This approach assumes the political world is objective, measurable, and quantifiable. It believes in the existence of an external reality that can be captured with precision.
So the focus here is primarily on explaining and predicting phenomena.
Right. If the world is measurable, then we can use statistical procedures, large data sets, and all sorts of tools to formulate predictions, observe regularities, and test robust hypotheses.
The value is in its explanatory and predictive power.
Purely, what we often call nomothetic knowledge, the search for general laws.
So the key question for the quantitative researcher is pretty straightforward. What are the objective links and the demonstrable cause and effect relationships between variables?
Yes. They're looking for patterns, for correlations, and for statistical proofs that hold true across a large population,
But then you have the qualitative counterpart.
which operates from a profoundly different starting point, a different epistemological premise.
Which is?
It assumes the political world is actively constructed by the actors who are operating within it. This is the interpretivist tradition.
Okay, so this means the focus shifts completely. Instead of measuring objective links, the goal becomes what?
The goal becomes describing, interpreting, and assigning meanings to political phenomena and processes. We move from asking how many to asking how, and crucially, why.
The qualitative researcher's ultimate goal, then, is fundamentally hermeneutic.
Exactly. It is about understanding subjective experiences related to political actions, status, and perceptions of political events. We seek to uncover the sense of political life, recognizing that a political action is only meaningful in the context of the actor's own understanding of it.
And this is where that operational difference, flexibility, becomes so important. The qualitative approach allows methods to be changed or even modified during the research process itself.
Yes.
Tell us why that kind of flexibility is a necessity here, where in a quantitative study, it would be considered, a fatal flaw, contamination.
Because if you assume reality is constructed and it's continuously shifting, then the tools you use to capture it have to be able to shift too.
Oh.
If I go into an interview expecting to talk about local taxes, but the subject introduces this compelling, completely unexpected narrative about political marginalization within their church community, I have to be flexible enough to pivot the research design to follow that emergent, meaningful data.
If you stick to the script, you miss the real story.
If I stick rigidly to the original plan, I miss the lived political reality of that person.
And that flexibility stems from this inherent assumption that knowledge itself is subjective.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
If the reality you are studying is constantly being constructed and reinterpreted by the actors, your methods must be equally fluid to capture that shifting reality. The knowledge is always mediated through the researcher, the subject, and the interaction between them.
So you value depth and richness over generalizability.
Depth over breadth, every time.
But this raises a major challenge, and we need to address it head-on for our listener. If the knowledge is subjective and methods can change midstream, how can we trust the findings? Doesn't the source material acknowledge a crucial limitation about predictability?
It does, and it's a necessary honesty. Qualitative research cannot be used for large-scale forecasting or for drawing quantifiable, statistically significant conclusions about relationships between variables across a general population.
Its value isn't there.
Its value is rooted entirely in depth, not breadth.
So, if I want to know whether a new economic policy will decrease unemployment nationally, I need quantitative data.
You need the big numbers, yes.
But if I want to understand why a small, defined community in the Rust Belt feels so alienated that they refuse to vote, despite economic recovery numbers suggesting they should be satisfied.
Then you need the qualitative perspective.
Right?
The goal isn't predictive power, it's interpretive power. It's about understanding individual, unique, subjective experiences and the dense meanings attached to them. Its scientific value is in updating our theories of political behavior by providing evidence of complexity that statistical models necessarily flatten out.
So it lets us build better theories.
It lets us build better, more nuanced theories that quantitative researchers can then go and test on a wider scale. The two approaches are complementary, not competing.
But they operate on totally distinct philosophical platforms.
Exactly. So to give this qualitative political science the intellectual rigor it deserves, we need a strong conceptual framework. And the interpretivist approach, particularly symbolic interactionism, or SI, provides that anchor.
And it moves us away from studying behavior as just a mere reaction.
Right.
And towards studying behavior as deliberate, meaning laden action.
That's it. SI grounds the entire endeavor in the fundamental concept of meaning. As scholars like Bever and Rhodes emphasize, Interpretive approaches focus on the specific meanings that shape actions in institutions.
That's the core insight, isn't it? That interhuman relationships, especially political ones, voting, protesting, campaigning, they can't be understood without first understanding the associated meanings and symbols.
Exactly. We are not just reacting to stimuli. We are constantly interpreting the symbols we encounter. The flag, the party logo, the politician's rhetoric, the cultural weight of a policy's name.
So let's dig into the core thesis of SI, drawing on Herbert Blumer. What is he telling us about how the political world is structured?
Blumer's core thesis is it's revolutionary for political science. He says the world, including the political world, is constantly being created by actors, individual or collective.
It's not a static backdrop.
Not at all. It makes political reality inherently subjective, fluid, and variable. It's a stage we are continually building as we act on it.
And this continuous creation is driven by deeply held values.
Yes. Actors base their actions on their values, their beliefs, their preferences. The simple act of voting for a party suggests more than just a statistical probability. It suggests you share the values that party exposes in its political message. That action is therefore laden with deep personal and collective meaning.
But meaning isn't innate. It's negotiated through symbols and interaction. How does this continuous modification actually work in practice?
Well, Blumer noted that our actions towards things are based on the meanings those things hold for us. But meaning is never static. It's assigned through symbols, language, gestures, objects, and it's a continuous dynamic process that's constantly being modified through social interaction and interpretation.
And for that interaction to even begin, you need a shared language.
You need a community of shared symbols, as he put it.
Can you give us a simple political analogy for this mutual modification of behavior?
Sure. Think about the symbolic meaning of a single issue, let's say climate change. For one group, that term might symbolize economic ruin and unnecessary regulation.
Okay.
For another, it symbolizes existential threat and moral responsibility. Now, these two meanings are not static. When those groups interact in a debate on social media, even just passively through shared news consumption, their definitions of the symbol climate change are mutually modified.
Even in small ways.
Even in small ways, perhaps leading to tiny changes in their behavior or preferences. That interaction is constantly shaping and reshaping political reality.
So political participation itself, the act of casting a ballot or attending a rally, becomes what Blumer called a situation of action.
Absolutely. The political actor is not passively receiving a situation. They are actively engaged in defining the meaning of that situation.
How so?
Well, for one person, seeing high voter turnout might give the act of voting extreme importance. They give it meaning and urgency. For another, they might interpret the entire process as illegitimate or trivial and invalidate their participation completely. The difference is in the meaning they assign through interpretation. And that is what the qualitative researcher studies.
And this takes us to the truly critical point that rejects that purely rational actor model. Blumer assigns interpretation a massive role, and he rejects simplified cause and effect reasoning.
Interpretation is what gives meaning to facts. A government announces an expenditure of $2 billion on infrastructure. The fact is the expenditure. But that expenditure might be interpreted by opposition forces as financial negligence and by the governing parties as a necessary stimulus. Public space is always filled with these diverse, competing interpretations.
And the source emphasizes a really critical insight here.
It does.
It is not facts that are the ultimate source of misunderstanding and division, but their interpretations.
That is a profound difference. If political conflict is interpretive, then simply presenting more facts isn't going to solve it. You have to change the meaning assigned to those facts.
And this is where qualitative research truly shines, because it has to penetrate beyond simple demographics.
Right. Quantitative studies can tell us what a high-status, liberal, urban voter prefers. But qualitative research has to uncover the individual ways of perceiving politics, the motivational structures, and the intensely personal meaning-giving processes.
Let's look at the anecdote the source uses, because it perfectly illustrates this failure of demographic prediction.
Yes. The specific case involved a high-status, liberal, urban voter who you'd statistically predict would support one kind of candidate who actually supported their rival.
Why?
Not due to ideology. The researcher discovered the motivation was intensely subjective. The voter had a strong negative evaluation of their local municipal officials. They then transferred their pre-existing antipathy from a specific conservative-leaning TV station, which they saw as sympathetic to the rival candidate, and they projected that negativity onto the rival candidate entirely.
Yeah, hold on. So the motivation to vote was a chain reaction. Anger at the local council projected onto a TV station, which was then projected onto a completely unrelated political candidate.
Yes.
That level of subjective motivation is completely irrational from a large-scale statistical perspective.
It's idiosyncratic, it's highly contextual, and yet it determined the political outcome for that individual. That is the kind of dense, personal motivation that can never, ever be captured by checking boxes on a survey.
It requires a conversation.
It requires depth interviewing and careful interpretation to uncover the semantic link that the voter personally constructed in their own mind.
This also explains why politicians so often don't speak in highly technical objective terms.
Exactly. Since most citizens aren't intimately interested in the institutional mechanics of politics, politicians are forced to engage in massive interpretative efforts. They simplify complex issues using everyday language, metaphors, comparisons.
What's the goal?
Their goal is to create similar interpretive schemas among citizens, to foster a community of meanings and thereby increase public interest and engagement. They are trying to standardize this subjective understanding of their actions.
That community of meanings sounds like it relies heavily on what the source calls circular interaction, how interpretations are created and spread. How does that cycle work politically?
Circular interaction is the engine of shared political understanding. It's a process of mutual reinforcement of actions where participants stimulate each other's behavior, which leads to a kind of standardization.
So it's a feedback loop.
A feedback loop.
Yeah.
Bloomer noted that this process helps define things like who the opponents are, who the persons of authority are, and what institutional practices mean within a certain community.
Can you give us a contemporary example of that circularity, maybe involving social media or a shared cultural experience?
Sure. Imagine a small political scandal breaks. An individual reads a heavily framed headline from their preferred news source, which confirms their existing belief that the political leadership is corrupt.
Right?
They share this with their close friends or their social media group. When their friends reinforce that interpretation, yes, they always were corrupt, the original individual's belief is strengthened.
The echo chamber effect.
It's the mechanism of the echo chamber. The shared action of disseminating the interpretation and the shared symbols, the specific words used to describe the scandal, they mutually reinforce the behavior, leading to the standardization of the meaning of that scandal within that group. The definition of the leadership as corrupt becomes a standardized and self-reinforcing truth.
A community of meaning is formed.
A community of meaning is formed.
And these interactions aren't limited to formal political spaces. This political judgment formation is happening everywhere.
Crucially, yes. Interactions happen at the dinner table, in the family, at the workplace, in peer groups. They shape political judgments and beliefs, and they form this domestic political discourse from which the dominant image of politics eventually emerges.
The quality of that discourse matters.
The quality of the intellectual and cultural condition of the society directly impacts how political reality is understood and interpreted.
Now, a potential criticism of symbolic interactionism is that it feels very micro-level, focused only on small groups and individuals.
Right.
But the source makes it clear that SI addresses the macro level too, through the concept of connected actions.
This is vital for political science. Connected actions refer to common forms of collective behavior involving organizations, institutions, or groups. Think of a parliamentary debate or the operations of a state bureaucracy. Order, in this view, emerges as a new form of action.
So how does SI look at a large, stable organization like the Pentagon or a major political party?
The symbolic interactionist point is that even these regular, repeated actions, like filing a report or running a standardized campaign, they have to be created anew every single time they occur.
They don't just happen automatically.
No. The rules and roles within the institution are upheld and maintained, not through static force, but through continuous symbolic interpretation and interaction among the participants. If people stop interacting in ways that confirm the meaning of the institution itself begins to dissolve or change its meaning.
So SI gives the qualitative researcher the intellectual anchor they need.
It lets them analyze everything from a single citizen's decision to vote all the way up to the highest levels of organizational maintenance and change.
Okay, we have the deep theoretical grounding symbolic interactionism as the epistemology. Now let's shift to the operational level. What is the actual essence and the enduring value of doing this kind of research, and how do we structure it?
The essence, as it's defined in the source, is reaching the depth of political phenomena and the collective or individual meanings that are assigned to them.
It's what allows us to discover the real attitudes.
The real, not just the declared attitudes and understandings of the people we study. We get beyond the simple surface-level answers.
Krzysztof Konecki, a scholar of qualitative sociology, helps conceptualize this. He suggests that qualitative sociology is more than just a set of methods.
Right.
It's a qualitative way of thinking about human experience.
That qualitative way of thinking is the core mission. It's about using scientific and intersubjective empathy to find the meaning of individual and group experiences. The central task is to discover the sense of politics and the actions of political actors, and to situate that firmly within their biographical, ideological, or pragmatic context.
And by doing that, by problematizing what seems obvious or stereotypical,
By asking why something that seems simple is actually fraught with complex meaning.
you get surprising results.
You yield new, often surprising results and open up new cognitive perspectives.
So if every statistician knows that Group X is underrepresented in political leadership, the quantitative method confirms that fact.
It gives you the number.
The qualitative method explains the sense of political marginalization experienced by a woman in that group, framed by her personal history and the organizational habitus she encountered.
Exactly. It fills that void of why. And the source notes its particular crucial value in our modern context, specifically in what we call the post-truth era.
Why is qualitative research particularly vital when facts seem less important than narrative?
Because when the political world is saturated with manufactured narratives, with fake news, with post-truth rhetoric, qualitative research constructs authentic personal political narratives.
It's a counterweight.
It offers a crucial grounding counterweight. It seeks the real motivations behind actions, which are, a lot harder to fake in an in-depth interview than on a survey.
Like getting ex-politicians to talk about their time in power.
Exactly. Or getting their honest, unfiltered views on opponents. These personal truths introduce complexities that mass communication often tries to smooth away.
Okay, now for the operational challenge. If the philosophy demands flexibility, how do you prevent the research from becoming purely anecdotal or arbitrary? The source outlines a systematic conceptual process, the PRPE framework.
Yes, and this framework outlines 4 essential phases that ensure rigor from start to finish. It provides necessary structure without sacrificing the flexibility that the subject matter demands.
Phase 1 is P, preparation. What does preparation look like when the questions have to be open-ended?
Preparation defines the initial framework, the open-ended research problems, the what and the how. The researcher selects the initial methods and chooses the study group, which is often a smaller, carefully selected sample.
And the research question is key.
A key point from UEFLIC is that success depends heavily on a clearly formulated research question. However, and this is the difference, unlike in quantitative research, these questions must be clearly formulated but open to modification during the research.
So instead of asking, what is the correlation between income and voting for candidate Z?
The qualitative question might be, how do individuals in this specific economic context assign meaning to the concept of economic success? And how does that influence their perceived viability of candidate Z?
It shifts the focus from variables to meanings.
Perfect. And if the initial interviews reveal that the concept of economic success is entirely secondary to, say, community cohesion, the researcher has to be prepared to adjust their focus for subsequent interviews. That's the required flexibility built into the preparation phase.
Then we move to the core activity, our research.
This is the data collection and analysis hub. Data collection methods are utilized: individual and group interviews, participant observation, ethnographic studies, deep analysis of documents, media, or personal narratives. The essential point about the data analysis here is that it's fundamentally inductive.
Inductive analysis? Tell us what that practically means for the political scientist.
It means they are building theory from the ground up, not testing pre-existing hypotheses. The researcher moves from the specific data they've collected, the transcribed interviews, the field notes, to create initial codes and categories.
From those categories,
They organize that information into increasingly abstract concepts. If I keep seeing the same themes emerge, say, fear of external influence and nostalgia for local control, I inductively build a localized theory of political motivation based on those categories, which can then be compared to existing theories.
following the heavy lifting of research comes the necessary phase of P-publishing.
This is simple but crucial for scientific integrity. It just emphasizes making sure the scientific text is appropriate for the target journal. and that you're maximizing the channels of access for readers.
An insight that remains unpublished is inert.
Scientifically inert.
Yeah.
And finally, we have E-evaluation. This is basically quality management for qualitative research. Evaluation is the process of assessing the value of the research you've undertaken, focusing on quality management. And crucially, the evaluation phase is also preparation for subsequent studies. It's about identifying the research's strengths and weaknesses, ensuring continuous improvement.
Which brings us directly to the rules that govern the rigor of this approach.
Exactly. It's a necessary feedback loop.
Okay.
Now we get to the core of rigor. As we noted, methodological flexibility in qualitative research is not synonymous with procedural arbitrariness.
Right.
To uphold scientific integrity and produce trustworthy results, qualitative research has to adhere to 4 essential rules.
The first rule is transparency. This seems critical for increasing trustworthiness, especially given the historical problem of poor access to material in political science, as observed by scholars like Andrew Moravcsik. Why is access such a problem for qualitative work specifically?
Because qualitative data is often messy, it's personal, and it's voluminous. It can include hundreds of pages of interview transcripts, field diaries, confidential documents.
It's not a clean spreadsheet.
It's not a clean spreadsheet. So Moravcsik, in alignment with APSA recommendations, breaks transparency into 3 necessary sub-rules to combat this lack of access.
Okay, let's start with data transparency.
This means giving readers and the broader scientific community access to the wealth of raw sources you used. This allows the reader to assess whether your interpretations are valid. The community postulates wider data publication, the transcripts, the notes, the documents, or at the very least, a crystal clear justification for not disclosing it if confidentiality prevents full publication.
So if a conclusion is based on an interpretation of 15 interviews, the reader needs to be able to see the raw material from those interviews.
They need to see it. The second is analytical transparency, and this goes right to the heart of the qualitative process, the interpretation itself.
How you got from A to B.
You have to precisely explain to the reader how you move from the raw collected data to your specific conclusions, whether they are descriptive, interpretive, or causal claims. In simple terms, you have to reveal the intellectual journey.
You have to show your work.
You have to show your work. If you claim that 3 themes emerged from your inductive analysis theme A, B, and C, you must show which snippets of which interviews gave rise to those themes, and how you connected those snippets into abstract concepts. It makes the interpretation verifiable, even if it can't be replicated exactly.
And the third is production transparency.
Or the transparency of the processing material. If the research involves proprietary data or complex fieldwork, you have to provide a full, detailed description of the procedures you used to gather or generate that data. Readers must understand the methodology of how you selected specific evidence and arguments from all the possible choices.
So if you did participant observation in a political organization,
you need to detail how you gleaned access, how long you were there, what your role was, and how you selected the moments you recorded versus the moments you ignored.
The source also adds a modern twist to transparency, advocating for active citation.
Yes. Active citation suggests using hyperlinks to original source documents, especially when your conclusions are ambiguous, controversial, or non-obvious. If a political scientist makes a bold, interpretive claim based on a document that is publicly available online, they should link directly to the page number in that document.
It fosters immediate discussion.
It fosters immediate discussion and allows the reader to engage directly with the foundational material. It maximizes cooperation and accessibility.
Okay, moving on. Rule 2 is auto-evaluation and reflexivity. This sounds like continuous self-assessment, which is often difficult for researchers to practice consistently.
It is, but it's about intellectual responsibility. Auto-evaluation is about consciously accepting responsibility for one's actions in the research process and continuously identifying the strengths and the weakest links in your own procedure. It aligns directly with those PRPE phases. Every phase is subject to verification and modification.
The source mentions the R recommendation phase as a distinct component of auto-evaluation. What does that entail practically?
So this recommendation phase is specific to self-assessment and future planning. It focuses on drawing conclusions regarding future modifications and actions that are necessary to improve the quality of your future research.
So if your interview style was off?
Right. If, for instance, a researcher realizes their initial interview style was too formal and it inhibited deep subjective responses, they document that failing in the evaluation phase, and their recommendation is to adopt a more conversational style next time. It's a core element of the professionalization of the researcher.
There's also a fascinating psychological component here, referencing Kozilecki. How does self-awareness affect research quality?
Well, Kozilecki suggests auto-evaluation contributes to the researcher's self-awareness and self-knowledge, which is composed of descriptive judgments, value judgments, and judgments about personal standards. In qualitative research, where the researcher is the main instrument,
Self-awareness is vital.
it's vital. The researcher must acknowledge their own personal conditioning, their gender, history, culture, socioeconomic status, which inherently influences the interpretations they formulate during the study. Reflexivity is the active intellectual effort to identify these biases and discuss how they may have shaped the findings.
Doesn't that sound contradictory, though? If the researcher's perspective is always present, how can we trust the findings?
That's the challenge.
Yeah.
But the goal isn't impossible objectivity. The goal is documented subjectivity.
Okay.
The source notes that through rigorous auto-evaluation, the process might reveal new, unexpected results or new qualitative properties in the research, what we call emergent procedures. Flexibility is the strength of qualitative research, and emergent processes that result from sincere evaluation harness that strength, rather than letting it devolve into randomness. If the data leads you somewhere new, you document the path you took.
Rule 3 is contextuality. This really reinforces the foundational arguments for qualitative research we discussed earlier.
Yes, contextuality is the imperative to study political phenomena within their natural, social, political, economic, and cultural context. Criswell sees the natural context, the setting where the subjects actually live and act politically, as the single most important characteristic of qualitative research. You have to study the phenomena where they actually occur.
And the purpose is not just observation, but active reconstruction of meaning.
Exactly. As Strauss-Romanovska notes, the goal of interpretive research is to isolate a phenomenon, like a localized protest movement, describe it clearly, and then reconstruct the semantic links between the various factors involved, assigning sense and meaning to the whole event.
And you have to consider all contexts.
A wide array of relevant political contexts: ideological, partisan, institutional, organizational, geographical, demographic, and biographical.
So if a quantitative researcher analyzes voting behavior using the ideological context, left versus right,
A qualitative researcher has to include the biographical context. How did this individual's personal journey lead them to assign this specific meaning to left or right?
they have to capture that dense web of influence.
They have to. If the biographical context is what led the voter in that anecdote to project their anger about a local official onto a national candidate, then ignoring the biographical context makes the resulting political analysis incomplete or even misleading.
Finally, we reach Rule 4, openness. This focuses heavily on the relationship between the researcher and the subject, which is often much more intimate in qualitative work than in a survey setting.
Openness requires the research to be a symmetrical, two-sided relationship where the researcher acts transparently. The subject must be informed about the true purpose and intentions. The researcher doesn't act from a detached position of better knowledge.
It's a dialogue, not an extraction.
A dialogue. This means treating the subject as a competent co-creator of knowledge, recognizing an equality of competence between the researcher and the researched.
That sounds philosophically lovely, but how do you execute that equality in a formal research setting?
You execute it through deep respect for the subject's own perspective. Crucially, this affects your language and categorization. The researcher must consciously use categories and concepts that are cognitively and emotionally close to the subject.
Why is that so important?
It minimizes the imposition of the researcher's sophisticated academic perspective and ensures that the subject's interpretation is captured faithfully. If the subject uses an everyday term to describe their political opponent, the researcher should analyze that term and its specific localized meaning, rather than forcing the subject's concept into an abstract, predefined academic category.
So the burden is on the researcher to meet the subject where they are.
Exactly. Not asking the subject to translate their life into academic jargon. And sometimes openness involves a final check with the subjects themselves, often called member checking.
Going back to them.
Verification sometimes requires returning to the subjects after the analysis to verify whether the constructed interpretations accurately reflect their viewpoint. This minimizes distortion and ensures that the generalizations created stem from the least altered experience possible. The overall goal of openness is authentic capture.
This entire framework, transparency, auto-evaluation, contextuality, and openness, it makes it crystal clear that qualitative research is not the easy path.
And not by a long shot.
It demands extraordinary rigor, self-awareness, and detail precisely because it is dealing with a shifting, subjective reality. Hashtag tag outro.
So this deep dive into the Prolegomena has really shown us that qualitative political science is not a niche methodology. It's a necessary intellectual evolution of the discipline.
It's crucial where political phenomena are complex, ambiguous, and variable, and where, simple cause and effect models just fail to provide any real insight.
It fundamentally allows the researcher to capture those individual narratives and thought processes.
The crucial step needed to update our scientific understanding of politics beyond those simplistic behavioral models. We are focused on the mechanism of meaning-making.
And the power lies in interaction, which is driven by symbolic interactionism. Through interaction, both real and virtual, people are constantly defining their relationship with politics. They're creating personal, subjective images that eventually coalesce into intersubjectivity or shared meaning.
And that is how the micropolitical world is constructed daily.
And that micropolitical world is where political legitimacy is actually won or lost. People determine their acceptance or rejection of political action based entirely on how they interpret it, whether they see the actions of a leader as acceptable or as stirring controversy and opposition.
This leads us back to the core challenge then. The ultimate task for the qualitative political scientist, and for you as a discerning observer, is not just to record what people say they prefer. It's to understand the micropolitical world they construct every single day, and the meanings they assign to the symbols within it, which is what fundamentally determines their political behavior.
So what does this all mean?
If interpretation, not fact, is the true source of political division and understanding, consider this provocative thought. Take a major controversial political decision today, maybe a policy change or a piece of legislation. How many wildly different yet equally valid interpretations exist for that single decision across society, driven by different habitus and different circular interactions? And what does the sheer variability of those subjective meanings tell us about the ultimate objective nature of political reality? If the only reality that matters is the one people believe, then interpreting belief is the most powerful research tool we possess.